From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. As a composer whose gift for lush melody might make you think he sold his soul for the John Williams touch, David Arnold has put epic symphonic life into such blockbusters as Stargate and Independence Day. His fusion of orchestra and pulsing electronics reinvigorated James Bond from Pierce Brosnan to Daniel Craig, all while deducing seasons of Sherlock Holmes, voguing with Zoolander, changing lanes with Metallic Electronica, and making tough guy action sing in his collaborations with director John Singleton on Too Fast, Too Furious, Four Brothers, and the supremely funky Shaft. In a 3-decade-long career comprising nearly 100 scores, David Arnold has often shown a talent for baroquely devilish fun in the Stepford Wives and twisted TV reinterpretations of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Dracula. But perhaps his ear for heaven and hell has most impressively paid off with his music for Amazon Prime's Good Omens, an adaptation of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's bromance between the demon Crowley and beyond nice guy angel Aziraphale, both of whom last time averted Armageddon by bringing their inevitably good spirits to the Antichrist. Saluting the Omen as crossed with gothic humor and serious emotion, Arnold's mix of whimsy and the supernatural now returns with this odd couple as the mind-wiped archangel Gabriel ends up in Aziraphale's bookstore. But if the last season followed a timeline while saluting the characters' biblical pasts, Arnold gets to swing wide with 6 stylistically diverse episodes that let him play the trials of Job, the ghastliness of grave robbing, the brain-eating taste of English Nazi zombies, and a neighborhood get-together that might really pitch Earth into the underworld this time out. For David Arnold, these new omens are better than good. They're great at revealing just how alternately goody-goody blissful and sinisterly fun his music can be at showing off his infernally impressive melodic powers. And now let's welcome a composer who once again gives the likable demon his musical due, David Arnold.
Hi, I really should get some more photographs done.
I think you look pretty good.
Well, no, it's just because there's about 3. I think I've done 1 proper photo session in my entire life, possibly 2. And I think every 10 or 15 years should be, and I'm due another one. I mean, I think the first one was in 1996, 97 possibly. And then I did another one maybe 10 years ago. So maybe it's time for I don't know. I never liked them anyway, but that's not what we're here to talk about, is it? But every time you see photographs of your thing, you think, oh my God. Anyway.
Well, you know what? One thing I really love about, Good Omens in so many respects is that, we're kind of, used to really big swaggering, symphonic scores, from you, but you have this whole other side of doing kind of playful horror music. As it were. And it's the same thing with, Neil Gaiman. You're used to very serious genre pieces, from him. And now comes along Good Omens, which I was completely unaware of until I saw it on Amazon Prime. And it's just a real joy. And it's light, but it's serious issues. But again, it's just really likable and fun.
Well, it's all of those things. I think it is at its heart, it's about very human things. It just happens to posit these very human things in sort of superhuman, spiritual, demonic, angelic ways, which means that for me, it's very entertaining. And when the actual real emotive core of it lands, you sort of get softened up by how sort of funny and entertaining and brilliantly performed the 2 leads are. David and Michael are just extraordinary, I think. And so when things land, they land with a real thud because you've kind of been softened up by the communication between the 2 of them on screen and the words that they get to say. are incredibly, for me, entertaining and a huge joy. And I still laugh at it, and I've seen it a million times. So all those things are great for writing with, because it's ultimately it's about truth. It's about the truth of what people feel. And it's interesting that we see that through the prism of two entities that aren't people. They're not human, but they carry this sort of emotional luggage, I suppose, that humans do, because they've been around them since they came into existence. So it's a huge like patchwork of things. I mean, the first season was so full of characters and so full of different things. The second season is a little more streamlined, but you like you said in your intro, there's still Nazi zombies in 1941, bombed out London. There's still Job and his family being, tested by God. There's still the angel Gabriel. There's still grave robbing in Scotland in the 1800s. And there's still a legion of demons sent to, crush Aziraphale and Crowley and find the angel Gabriel in a bookshop in Soho. So, these things all seem very unlikely, but somehow when you watch it, it seems very natural. But there's a lot of music. I mean, that's why we're getting down to the core of it. There's actually a lot of music, and it has to do a lot of work in a lot of very different ways. I mean, I think that the trickiest thing about it, it's not really tricky because it's just writing more music. That's all it is. But we have the central musical, idea of Good Omens, which is principally the Good Omens theme and that little lullaby that sits in the middle of it as part of it, which is the kind of umbrella piece, the bit that kind of can be opened up over most things and you'll feel at home with it, depending on how it's treated. But in that, you've got these now what they call minisodes, which are kind of not really directly related to the story, the central story of who is Gabriel and why is he back. Because the Book of Job is kind of looked at and commented on in a way which is independent of that drama. So we have to create the world of the Book of Job in that biblical setting, which isn't, and it never appears in the rest of the show. When they are in Scotland, obviously we're going to have bagpipes, but there is that grave robbing thing, and that's very sort of heart-wrenching story in that, and that doesn't appear in the rest of the show. So you've got these kind of little 20-minute movies within the show, which have to have completely different music. So it's not like we're doing, Good Omens music all the way through. It's like there's some Good Omens music, and then there's Good Omens music, but somewhere else with completely different setup and a completely different atmosphere. So I wouldn't say it was easy. It's like it's actually quite tricky to do it in the time that you have to do it, because you don't really get that much time to think about it that much. If you're writing over 4 hours of music and you've got to keep everyone happy, least of all me. You kind of have to be a bit instinctive about it, but that's the what is that? Is that that's a sort of précis of what it is, I think.
And again, you made such an incredible impression with your first score for Stargate, for your first major score. And again, I think, for me, the genre score that you did that I really noticed was the Stepford Wives, which La La Land put out. And again, there's a kind of very playful, devilish quality to that. And again, Dracula, which I thought was fantastic. And again, Good Omens kind of encapsulates this kind of trickster, devilish attitude.
Yeah, there's something slightly wicked about it, and I don't think it's wicked in a dark way. I think it's wicked in a playful way, and as I said, in a slightly devilish way. And there are plenty of classical composers who have these moments and elements in their work where they do things that they weren't supposed to do. Where they make little sort of melodic twists and turns. Against the grain of the time, and were sometimes frowned upon. We do little things, but for me, it's just like I write to what's in front of me. That's all it is. I just respond to it, and I have a take on what it is. And I think that's I think that's what a composer does, and what they should be doing a lot of the time, rather than walk into a meeting with the director and say, well, what were you thinking? I think it's always better to come in and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what it said to me, and this is what I feel we could do with. Now that's the start of a discussion, because obviously they're going to have an idea about what they think it should be. But I think it's like an actor, you know, if an actor comes in and hasn't done anything to say how this character is, then you're going to have to give him, you know, line readings, or, you know, tell him how to play the character. You don't want to be telling people how to play the character. I don't think a director wants to tell me how to write the music or what music to write. I think he should be talking, certainly in my preference, he should be talking in terms of emotions and color and tone. And then, you know, I'll think of a way into it musically, because he's going to be thinking about very different things. I'm going to be thinking purely about sort of character and story and structure, but he's got to be thinking about everything, you know, like the sound design and the you know, and the cut and the photography and all the things that directors have to do that I don't have to. But so I'd rather come in with this is what I think, and that's actually where the Good Omens theme came out of that process, because initially Neil had asked me to do Buddy Holly's Every Day as the theme, with the idea at the end of the main theme, at the end of each show, there would be a different version of Every Day. So right back in the early days of, you know, before they'd even started shooting, we had a table read of Good Omens season 1, episode 1. And after that, we looked at some of the props and the things that had been designed, and had a chat with a DOP, Gavin Finney, who's brilliant, and weirdly I've known since the 80s. Neil was saying, you know, I want Every Day. So I went away and I started doing what he had asked, which is doing like a heavy metal version of Every Day, a sort of Shakespearean version of Every Day, something that related to an element of the story, but Every Day by Buddy Holly. And all the time I was thinking this, I was thinking, you know, the thing about songs in shows and films, it's a bit like a great sight gag. You know, it has an effect for a brief amount of time, I think. It's not very often you get a whole song in a film, you know, that plays out. A lot of the time there's 15, 20 seconds, enough for you to get the energy of it, but then it kind of gets faded out, or it goes into something else. So it can't do the kind of lifting that score can do. Also, score can't have that kind of effect from, you know, memory and recall and all the other things that songs bring with them, that it's, you know, that they can be so effective at doing. So it just felt to me that Every Day, the song, isn't the theme of Good Omens, and that was the original idea, was that it was going to be the theme to Good Omens. And I thought, well, it's not, it's Every Day by Buddy Holly. Now we know that songs can, you know, change. You know, Stuck in the Middle with You, Stealers Wheel in Reservoir Dogs sort of became something a bit different as a result of how it was used in that film, but it's still that song. Every Day is a very sort of innocent, lovely, beautiful, you know, dancey little song, but it didn't feel that it was, you know, a demon and an angel existing alongside each other and finding a way of being together on this earth. And I thought something that should be both wicked and angelic at the same time. And so the first thing I actually wrote for it was in season 1, there's a little lullaby that Crowley, David Tennant's character, sings to the Antichrist while he's trying to get him to go to sleep, because he's looking after him. And Neil wrote a little lyric, only about 6 lines, which is like, go to sleep and dream of pain, and you know, when you will rule when earth's destroyed. But it's sung, you know, I said I want to write something like, if Walt Disney was Satan, what would he do? So we wrote this little tinkling little lullaby, very gentle, and it was done really quickly because they had to shoot it and David Tennant had to sing it, and it just never really left me. That melody never left me, and the more I thought about it, this felt like it was the backbone of something else, and so I started working on the rest of what became the Good Omens theme, and Doug McKinnon, the director, and Neil came over to spot episode 1, season 1, and I told them that I'd had an idea for the theme, and it's sort of nerve-wracking because it's a big part of their show, and it was very much their show. Neil had obviously been babysitting the idea, obviously had born it with Terry Pratchett, but had sort of babysat it since then and protected it since then to make sure that the version that he made was perfect, and to put a stamp on it, which is kind of from the outside, is a bit of a risk, I think. So I played it to them, and I mean, thank God they liked it, because I remember saying at the time that I'm glad you liked it because I haven't got anything else. But I did think that, this is the solution for me. This is the way to say this is Good Omens. It had devilish stuff, it had angelic stuff. And in the structure of that, every time something played something sweet, there was something beneath it, doubling it, stuck in the background, which was sort of gnarled and nasty and dark. And also the other way around, whenever there was any sort of dark and nasty, devilish kind of writing, there was something as well in the background, which was angelic and sweet. So there was always the two of them represented in the music. But you kind of do that just by sort of discovering it as you go along. Am I talking too much?
No, it's wonderful, and I'd love to get some audience questions in. And we have one from YouTube, and he's asking, "What is the biggest commonality and differences between writing musicals, producing records, scoring TV shows, low-budget movies, and big-budget movies?"
Well, the easiest commonality is you've got to think of some music for something. If it's a musical, you have the book and you have the story and you have the characters. You get to create that out of nothing. So there's nothing to make it fit to. It's in a way it's much more liberating, because you can write a song as long as you like it to be, as long as it takes to do the job that it's meant to do, which is to move the story from there to there. And in the moving of the story and in the singing of that song, there has to be a journey taken, and we have to be clear about what it is and what it's doing. Otherwise, what's the point of having it? So that's like sort of songwriting, but posh songwriting, because there are other things you have to consider other than, do I just like this as a song? It has things that it has responsibilities to. If you're making a record, you're really applying yourself to, for me, the vocal and the lyric and the support around that process, to make sure that if it's a song with lyrics and the lyrics are hopefully meaningful and solid, that we hear them, and that this is supported by a cushion of music, no matter whether it's spiky or dark or twisted or melodic or gentle, or but which informs and supports the song. I'm song first, definitely. Big budget movies and writing stuff for picture, just for picture, I think the job is exactly the same. The only difference is, if I'm doing a big budget movie, I've got 100 people standing behind me waiting to tell me what they think. And in TV, you might have 2 people standing behind me, tell me what they think, and they haven't got much money to change it. That's the main difference, is that you tend to work on much smaller budgets, slightly tighter, weirdly tighter timescales, even though you can get through a whole movie in 8 weeks. It took about 5 months to write Good Omens, because there's 4.5 hours of music, I think, in it. So there's an awful lot more. So there's a lot more work to do in TV, in a way, because you've just got to keep going. Because if you've got a 6, 8, 10 part show, that's an awful lot of music. I bumped into someone up at Air Studio who's doing a big show for Disney, and he was saying that he hadn't realised the months that it absorbs. It's just a huge amount of time to do these things. And what's weird about it is 5 months of writing it and recording it and mixing it, but people watched it largely over a sort of 2-day period, and then it's on to the next thing. It's an odd thing, like movies, isn't it? It's like when I was growing up, there was twice a year maybe there was a claim by a filmmaker for it, or the studios, for this film to be the cinematic experience of the year, the cinematic experience of the year. Da-da. And most of the time it was, but now you got 3 of them a week. It's like every weekend it's the biggest movie of the year. It's like it's this, it's that, and you're kind of like, okay, and then you like live with it, and you haven't even got time to think about it before you're in there on Friday and Saturday watching it, and on Monday the PR starts for the next week's release so you're kind of sort of like slapped in the face a lot with so much information all the time. I don't know if you have as much time to sort of sit down and let it sink in. I sort of miss that thing where films would run for like 4, 6, 8 weeks in the cinema, and you'd have to wait for a couple of years for it to be on the TV. And by that time, you'd have thought about it a lot, and it had gone in. But now it's like you can watch it almost immediately, and to a certain extent, with these shows where you get multiple episodes, you can't have the discussion with people because sometimes people have watched 1, some have watched 4, some have watched 6. I know a lot of people watched Good Omens when it went on Amazon, I think it was 1 a.m. in the morning, and had finished it by 7 a.m. And so you can have a conversation with them, but you've got to exclude everyone else who might be starting it that evening or intending to watch 1 a night or 2 a night or 1 a week. So we don't have that communal response to it. And so trying to build something solid, which a lot of people can get hold of, I find that, the music that I love was, I think people are still performing it in concerts. And it's maybe less so now with stuff. Lucky, like if you think of like contemporary theme tunes for TV now versus the 70s, for instance, that it's a completely different world, and the requirements are different. That's why I always sort of, you thank God when you hear like Nick Britell, doing Succession, and you think like, well, that's one for the ages. Do you know what I mean? Like that will never not be brilliant and classic, and everyone knows it. Those are the things that I like. I always try and do something which hangs around, that's not going to be hopefully forgotten about in the next couple of days. Although I do accept that some people will forget it, which is fine. I forget things.
Now we've got a question from Elise on YouTube. She teaches music theory and composition at a K-12 art school. Can you please describe your process as you approach composing for a project? And would you mind if I share your answer with my students?
No, I don't mind. I don't see how I can stop it really, because you're recording it. Issue an injunction. Let's see. The process. Well, the process of writing is usually the same, but with every project, it's a different set of circumstances. So it's difficult to say this is what's normal. Once you get the abnormal stuff out of the way, and that can be, we could be talking for days about that. The process of there's a picture in front of me, and the picture in front of me is asking me a set of questions. It's saying I need something, and you've got to tell me what it is. So I have to kind of lose myself in the idea of what it is in order to discover what the requirement is that this show needs. And then I tend to go away from it. So I'll watch it, and then maybe I'll go away from it for about a week or a week and a half if I can, and just wander around in a bit of a daze and let it percolate. Sometimes you're thinking of things directly. This is not on the piano. It's not on any other instrument. This is like long walks, long drives, really just kind of emptying your mind to a certain extent, getting the stuff out of the way till you get to the more, the hidden things that it's quite tricky to figure out where that comes from. And then a lot of the time, if I'm lucky, something will enter my head. Something will just pop in when I'm not even thinking about it, which might be the central idea. It might be the kernel of the idea. Sometimes that doesn't happen. You just have to sit down at a piano and hammer it out. But once I've got I think the most difficult part is coming up with what is the music for this show. Not how am I going to orchestrate it or arrange it, how am I going to get it played? That's the next bit. That's the craft bit, I think. The kind of inspirational thing is, what is this music going to be? Why is it going to sound like this? And why should it sound like that? Because someone's going to ask me why it is that way, and I need to have a good answer. So you go through an awful lot of that's not going to work, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. But then when you have these ideas and you kind of figure a way of playing them musically so it sounds like something, then the second thing is like, well, what's the sound of this? Is it going to be choral? Is it going to be electronic? Is it going to be orchestral? Is it going to be, guitar? Whatever it is, you kind of have to then make that decision about why that is that. And then the third part is you have to go through the picture scene by scene, having spotted it with the director. Spotting is when you go through the film with a director and producer and decide where the music's going to go and what it's meant to be doing. And then it's applying ideas and making them fit the film that you're looking at, and tonally deciding how do we use that core material and paint the rest of this scene with that as the kind of central fulcrum. And I do that in Logic because everyone needs to hear demos now immediately. So I do it with sample libraries, and I tend to now write in the box. I've done the odd, sometimes if I'm doing a record or something, I'll do it with pen and paper, but most of the time now it's in the box. And I'll produce something which is, close to where we're going to end up. And that's our first discussion point. I will attach that to the film, send it off to them, and fingers crossed they respond to it positively. But if they don't respond to it positively, my take on that is all they're doing is asking me to write more music, and I'm supposed to like doing that. So this is just another chance to write some more music. The first lot, maybe they didn't like it. Fine. There's stuff that I don't like. I can't tell them why they should like it. I can explain my reasoning for doing it, but I can't tell someone that they should like something that they don't like. And sometimes it is just that. It's no different to if you go into a restaurant and you order some food and they bring out food and the waiter said, the chef said, I've decided to do it a slightly different way. I've done this and I've done this. And you taste it and you go like, look, I know it's really well made. It's, beautifully presented. I just don't really like it. The chef telling you all the reasons why you should like it isn't going to make you like it. Right? You just have to say, okay, I get it. I'll make it a different way. I'll do it a different way. So using, I don't want to overstretch any food analogies, but I'll go back and I'll stick a bit of vodka in it or whatever it is that's needed.
Now, Ivan over at Bomb Music has seen Series 1, and he mentions that you use different orchestrations of the themes for the end titles. Now, was it difficult to select which one will appear on the album, as all of them are great? And how often does your favorite track not appear on the album?
Well, I mean, I put the albums together. I sort of made a decision in season 1 of Good Omens not to put all the end titles on, because as purely as a listening experience, I'm not sure if it would get in the way of the kind of storytelling aspect of the flow of the music. But I appreciate, I've heard so many people saying they want them. Well, now we've got 10. So my idea was, and it's always a bit of a, how do you do this theme again? So we've now done this theme 12 different times. Okay, we've got the original opening titles, we've got a slightly new opening title for episode 6 in season 2, and we've got the 10 closing title pieces, all of which are stylistically different and have somehow related to the show. I thought it might be nice to put all the end titles on one record somehow. I don't quite know how we're going to do it. Obviously there's only 10 pieces of music and it's not very long, it's like 2 minutes, I think, each one. But they're fun, I mean, they're good fun to listen to. There's some great, I think there's some, really good funny stuff in this season. There's some really good stuff in the first one, even though I say so myself, which I don't like doing. But I mean, they're good fun. And in a way, it was nice to do them because you are at the end of that particular episode and it feels like a relief. So it always felt like the office party when we get to do a different version of the Good Omens theme. How do we do it this time? And what's it going to be? So it's a little more unusual and eclectic this time round. But I would like to maybe just have a little, 10 track, all the closing titles of Good Omens in a row. That makes sense to me as a thing, rather than have 12 minutes, 15 minutes of score, and then that tune again, and then another 12, and then it again, and then again. But that's just me. I realize some people might like it differently, but
Now talk about endings. I just loved how the season ending. I mean, it's really kind of a stripped down, compared to how epic the first season was. And then this one, you just kind of just going, kiss him, you fool, and at the ending,
spoilers.
Yeah. Oh, it's been playing for the weekend, so I assume a lot of people have watched the whole thing by now. I know I binged right through it.
I always say that because it's a big deal, It's like, even if I'm doing a concert, I will say something about, like, I was talking about Casino Royale. I will ask the audience to say, like, has anyone not seen it? When I'm talking about Vespa, has anyone not seen it? And if one person puts up their hand, I won't spoil anything.
Oh boy.
It's
Okay.
Who would want to ruin a moment like that?
But I have to ask though, it's such a beautiful piece of music. It's such a heartbreaking kind of ending. And what was it like again, kind of ending the second series like that musically?
I find that I write that stuff much more naturally and easily. That comes much more naturally and easily to me. And also, these are very sort of specific but broadly human emotional things that we are experiencing watching this stuff happen, and I find that connecting to that is much easier than trying to connect to the idea of 1941's dead Nazis coming back as zombies. That's a tougher thing to connect to in a way, but people going through these very sort of human emotions and their response to it, and also our expectations of them and what we'd like them to be and where that we'd like them to be, are confounded to a certain extent. And so it's just a very, very honest response. And I find that I've always liked yearning. Mm-hmm. I've always liked, like sort of darker undertones of things. I've always liked those things that are slightly, I think this is true of songwriting as well. I've always liked things that are slightly out of your reach. I wrote one of those songs. I'd always wanted to write one of those "We Almost Made It" songs, and I put one in Made in Dagenham, the musical, which was about we nearly did it. We had all this stuff. We almost had it. We almost had it all. But we ended up not having it all. But I love that sense of somehow, for a brief moment, you celebrate the potential of the most beautiful thing that ever could have been, and you watch it flow away from you somehow, and you can't do anything about it other than watch. And from that point on, the next step that you take in your life is going in a completely different direction as a result. And it's the weight of those things, they're sort of, it feels to me sort of elemental and human. And I like that sort of thing to write about more than anything. It's much easier. It's much easier than writing about Godzilla or Dracula or Stargates or aliens. Do you know what I mean? It's like it just is, because it's what we know. So they say write what you know. So
now we've got. Well, I'm sorry. We've got a question from Eric, and he'd like to know, do you write themes and motifs with an eye to transform them as necessary, or just find the right tune and manipulate when necessary?
John Barry used to say to me, play the theme, play the theme, play the theme. That's kind of why every time I hear a John Barry tune, I know it. Most people know it, because it's been in the film a lot. He puts it in the movie. And it belongs to it, and it becomes it. And I mean, I've not everything that I write is thematic. Not everything. Most things I'd say were, but not everything. But 95% I'd say was melodic and thematic. And I think my reasoning behind that is, if I sat down and played it to you, could you somehow see the film or the TV show unfurl in your mind? Does it unlock all the things that you thought about when you watched it? Does it kind of travel to the parts of your brain and get them fired up again about like the first time they saw something, or how they felt. Like a smell can remind you of something that happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Does it do that? Does it have the legs, you know, to travel the distance from the screening of something to 5 years later, 10 years later, and still feel like it's the right thing for it? So, and I'm a big fan of theme tunes. I love them. If you go to most film music concerts, they're always the big tunes are the ones that get the biggest responses, and the big tunes are the ones that are usually in the program. So you're not going to go to most film music programs and not hear, you know, Star Wars and Superman and E.T. and James Bond and, you know, and Gladiator and you know, there's like tons of it, Rocky, everything. You know, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. We could go on, and I probably will. But you know, those tunes land in a way. You know, they land in a way which is sort of inexplicable. So I will write something which feels like it's the show in music form, and once you have that, then the treatment of it, you know, the way that you stretch it and pull it and twist it and turn it. It becomes quite easy because it's like you've got the building blocks. You know, it's like when, you know, it's interesting that when I did Shaft, the building blocks of that score was Isaac Hayes' score for Shaft and the theme for Shaft specifically. So everything that I did was kind of using the building blocks of that as, you know, our starting point. So when I'm writing a score which is thematic and has thematic material, then that's always my starting point in each cue. Is it appropriate to use or partly use or include or have elements of? It's usually a good idea to do it. Our main theme or themes in order to write the story of this moment. And I think that sense of continuity helps very much in the storytelling sense. Otherwise, I feel you have you probably have to have more music than you might otherwise need if something is kind of sound based, because then what you're doing is kind of creating a collection of sort of visceral moments which kind of have their moment at that time, but might not necessarily pay off if you hear it again, because it's just, you know, maybe it's because it's more sound based or textural rather than melodic. You know, and we've all been in movies, and, you know, when the big theme comes back, you know, you're done for. You know, it's like it makes you feel happy. You know, it does such an amazing amount of work, and that's just, you know, that's just me saying that's what I like. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that that's what I like, because there have been brilliantly constructed non-melodic scores. I know that. You know, there's plenty of that around as well.
Now, on the subject of the great John Barry, Louis would like to say hi and would like to know if you can explain the process of taking the baton, so to speak, from John Barry and other composers from the James Bond films and making the sound essentially your own, but yet blending with the traditional James Bond music to keep it all woven in a very nice, smooth transition from the past to the music of James Bond's future, as it were.
It's funny. I listened to an interview I did with John Burlingame, I think in 1997, when Tomorrow Never Dies came out. And I think there was a soundtrack album that came out with some extra stuff on it that wasn't on the song album. And we needed to put some more material on it. So they asked me if I would do an interview with John. Anyway, so I did an interview with John. So that was my first one. I mean, I listened to it. A, I sounded several pitches higher. B, I wasn't horribly embarrassed by everything I said. I was by some of it. But one of the things that I said then that I still believe now is that I think when I was doing that film, and in a way it became sort of my touchstone for doing the rest of them, was that as a fan of the series, I knew what I liked about John Barry's scores. You know, I knew what I loved about John Barry's scores and what they did and how it made me feel. And my memory of those films as a child, watching them in the cinemas, was very deeply ingrained. And I watched most of them in the cinema because the times when these films came onto the TV wasn't really until the 80s. You know, you'd have to wait 4 or 5, 6 years for a Bond movie to come out in a cinema and then be on the TV. When it was on the TV, it was a huge deal. It was always like on Christmas Eve or Boxing Day or Easter, when everyone would gather around. You know, it was a real proper cinematic event of the year. So I always had that. Somehow I wanted to recreate that sense that I had when I was watching it. And by doing what I was doing, I was kind of having the sense of what John was doing so brilliantly. And I really am no way comparing myself to him. But the sense of what he did and how that affected me with what I was interested in doing myself. And so it wasn't a conscious decision like, how do I do this like that, but a bit different. It was like, I knew what was great about it and I knew where I would like to take it. So I kind of grabbed hold of it with one hand and swam with the other hand. And I sort of kept it with me again as a sort of touchstone, as a sort of stylistic touchstone, the central thing. And there are bits that you could say were sort of Barry-esque in Tomorrow Never Dies, but there's also a ton of stuff that wasn't. You know, the stuff like the bike shop fight and the you know, the backseat driver cue that I did with propeller heads. You know, the love themes, you know, definitely influenced by John, you know, like all of my stuff, you know, it always somehow, you know, John had that incredible sense of yearning as well. You know, that sort of dark undercurrent, but, you know, incredible reach. And so I've always sort of felt somehow inclined in the same direction when I'm writing that sort of thing. But I think the action stuff is very different, and there's a lot of action in all of these Bond movies. So in a way, it was like what I said to John in 1997 is true today. I said I kept one foot in the 60s and one in the 90s, and to a certain extent, as we went on, that kept going. I think until Casino Royale, where we had a new Bond, and it didn't feel we were chasing, in a way, the history of it quite so much. Even though everyone was aware that this is James Bond still, it was a year zero James Bond, and as if nothing else had happened. So I kind of went into Casino Royale, and with the song especially, with the idea that this has to be before the James Bond theme was written. And so we have to be pre that moment. And it's, you know, much more sort of ugly and violent as a result, because he hadn't become this person yet.
Yeah. Now, in terms of really fun action scores that you've done, another really wonderful new release that just came out is a double CD of the complete score to Hot Fuzz, one of my favorite Edgar Wright movies. And again, in this one, you're not really, you're referencing a whole kind of other style of, like, you know, action buddy cop films. Tell me a bit about doing Hot Fuzz.
Well, Edgar's thing was, you know, we need the score to be like every kind of extreme kind of Tony Scott style American Hollywood sincere stroke insincere music you could think of. This is nothing to do with anything that anyone's written for Tony Scott's films, by the way. But, you know, there is a sort of stylistic approach, which is you know, it's not that different from someone, you know, looking cool, trying hard to look cool. And so we wanted that because they idolized, you know, like Nick's character idolized, you know, Bad Boys 2. And, you know, his whole thing about being a cop was that he kind of wanted to be the sort of cop that would be in a Tony Scott movie. So the music was kind of fashioned to support his very British, parochial, small town policeman and his dream of it being Will Smith in Bad Boys 2. You know, have you ever fired your guns in the air and said, you know, how many times we hear that in that film? You know, it's the dream of him. That's the sort of cop he wanted to be. And, you know, the glory of that film was that he ended up being able to be that kind of cop. In which case, the music, which had been sort of fantastical and ridiculous in a way, then became an actual genuine soundtrack to what was going on. Edgar was very specific about a lot of things. At the start of production, he would give everyone a kind of mood tape, which would have been a mixtape, I suppose, in the old days, but it was like a CD of songs that he felt encapsulated the mood of Hot Fuzz and where we should be going. So, I mean, specifically the kind of acoustic guitar cues were that, you know, overtly uber sincere, poor me, you know, kind of music you get in those kind of glitzy sort of Hollywood films. And, you know, the action stuff was like a car crash of British and American ideas smashed together, but with, I think, a certain amount of bravado and chaos, which felt like what was going on. I mean, I still think it was one of the funniest films I've ever seen, and I never get tired of watching it, and I do still watch it quite a lot. I never got tired of watching it when I was doing it. You know, when you watch a movie when you're working on it, you watch it a lot. You know, hundreds of times some scenes, and I never got bored with it. I think, you know, that's the strength of the writing, especially the strength of the performances. I think, you know, they're both incredibly talented. Well, everyone. I mean, Olivia Colman was in it, and Steve Coogan was in it, and Bill Nye was in. I mean, you know, everyone is brilliant and really, really funny. Jim Broadbent. And the more I think about it, the more I think I'd probably go and watch it again now. But it's just very, very funny. And Edgar was always trying to find ways of making it funnier. So it wasn't just in the scoring. There were moments in the mix. He would come and sit in the mix. You'd never get a director in a mix. And he'd be looking at this scene going over and over and over. And we're mixing it. And it's, you know, it's not the most interesting experience for people who aren't invested in it. But he would stop and say, like, that moment there, goes, that frame, go back to that frame. What if we did something on that frame? And be like, well, you know, what were you thinking of? You know, like there might be something musical. Can we add something to that? And I'd run upstairs, do it quickly in the computer, like bring it down as a little stem, and we drop it in. And all of a sudden the things got funnier. You know, there was always a way. Can we get this funnier? Can we get this better? Right up to the point, you know, probably while they were printing, you know, is still trying to find ways of making it funny. And he's like an animator in that regard, you know, like frame by frame, how can this be better? So it was an education in itself. So it was, you know, my slightly broader approach to writing, which is melodic, you know, writing over the scene and hitting certain things that you need to hit. We were then having to kind of introduce this other element, which is like within those moments where we're hitting all of this need to hit, there's all this little stuff in the background. Someone in the background of a pub looks at someone else, and we need something for that. I hadn't even noticed, you know, because what was going on here was what I was interested in. But right back there's someone does something. And if you just put a little thing on it, that's why it's so rewatchable, because it is absolutely stuffed full of detail. So it was quite hard, but absolutely worth it. Yeah, brilliant. I loved it.
No, it's a great movie. Now, Andrew, John would like to know, are there any chances of a future release for the planned song from Die Another Day, I Will Return? It's a gorgeous theme.
Oh, do you know what? I started working on it with Don Black. Might have repurposed a lyric. There's a lyric that I really loved that I actually ended up, we did it in a song called No Good About Goodbye, which was a song that I recorded with Shirley Bassey, ironically. But I think the first line was something about like, before you make your move, think of the consequences. I just loved that as a line. You know, it sings really well. And so we kind of repurposed that in the middle section, the kind of B section of No Good About Goodbye, which was before you make your move, think of the consequences. What was the first part? Something about come to your senses, think of the consequences. You know, I mean, it's very Bondy anyway, but you know, Don's great at sort of Bondy stuff, as he should be. But yeah, I loved it. So anyway, so we had a verse. I know we got as far as a verse which is like will return. It was sort of like around there. It probably would have never made it as a sort of movie theme because it was probably just too introspective, I think. But yeah, no, I mean, I like the tune as well. Maybe it's not too late to make something of it. The ones that got away songs.
No, for sure. Now, Marcel Christian would love to first and foremost congratulate you on your music. And notice what I noticed right off the bat, which is that you have an extremely rich level of orchestration, notably in the first Stargate movie. What are your orchestrational influences?
Well, the great thing about Stargate was that I spent way too long on it. I think I was in a little hotel room in where was I? Off of Santa Monica Boulevard, near Book Soup. It wasn't far from there. So it wasn't far from the Corolco building, who were kind of producing it at the time. Book Soup, Virgin Megastore, Tower Records, I think. So, it's fantastic places. But I was quite naive at the time about how to do proper big film scores. I'd only done The Young Americans before, and that was done in my bedroom. So Stargate was written in the bedroom as well, but the bedroom was in a hotel in Los Angeles. And I also made a mistake, which I've never done since, of every time they cut the movie, I would rewrite the score. So I would rewrite, I remember like 4M11, I think I wrote 9 times, only because they were editing it. I mean, what I should have done is say, I'll wait till they finish that and then write it, but I didn't. So I was kind of doing that all the way along. So we wrote reams of music. And because I put a lot of time, I wasn't doing anything else, I put an awful lot of time aside to do it. We could really get into the detail. And it's funny, with that and Independence Day, where I definitely took months and months and months to do it, that obviously, it gives you a certain advantage in that you can get into the detail much more. The downside of it is sometimes you can get into detail a bit too much and lose the bigger picture. But that's really down to you to figure that part of it out. But so we had a lot of time, and Nicholas Dodd, who was orchestrating, came over after a few weeks of me starting, and he set up in a room at the end of the corridor in this hotel. And he would come into my room and we, get the material down, and then we sit together and figure out what was going to go where. And then he go into his room and start the full orchestration breakdown of it. And I carry on with the next cue. Then I go down to his room and then we go through the cue that he'd orchestrated and we get all that. So it's a lot of toing and froing. And it was brilliant. Because there was just so much of it. I mean, I know there's quite a lot of music in the movie, but I don't know how much I wrote. I must have written, 2.5, 3 hours of music, probably, for the show, but we didn't record all of it. And I remember the last 3 days before we were recording, supposed to be flying to London. And also there was a time when we didn't really have demos. It's like I think I mocked up 3 or 4 key sequences for Dean and Roland. And they didn't hear anything else. So they hadn't heard any of the score to picture until they got to the recording studio, which obviously is terrifying. Now that would never happen. But it was right on the cusp of, when people were starting to do demos with samplers. But it hadn't quite got to that point where you do the whole thing, to the point where several years later, I got a note from the studio executive, like complaining about the sound of an oboe sample. That was the note. This oboe doesn't sound right. But you show them a piece of paper and obviously you never get that. So I would play them things on the piano, like the key ideas. I would play them on a piano and say, this is my idea for this thing. And they would say yes or no. Luckily, most of the time. And then I would, the key moments, the big moments, I would mock up as best I could using the very limited equipment that I had. And they would come and say whatever they said about that, but the rest of it was like literally did not know what it was going to be like till we hit the studio, which is quite terrifying if you're spending all that money and you've only got sort of 6-7 days to record the whole thing. But yeah, really the difference was the amount of time that I committed to it, I think. I mean, we've kind of done a couple like that, but don't forget the other thing is, Stargate was a movie which supported that approach very much. It was it's sort of science fiction, so you have a different sense of responsibility in terms of truth. You know what I mean? It's like, the truths are emotional truths and everything, but it's not about anything real. It's a fantasy, exciting fantasy thing. So all the things that you ever sort of dream of, sort of science fiction, fantasy stuff, you can have, and it's fine. And Independence Day was a film that was thematically very, very strong. As a thematic film, this is what it's about and this is what happens. There is no doubt about what that is. It's not, no one hides anything. It's all in front of you. And Stargate is a film that is, again, thematically very sort of simple in a way. It's like we know what the story is and it doesn't shy away from it. But you've got these enormous things that you're looking at. Enormous, the sets were absolutely vast. And I went down on the set a few times when they were hauling up the Stargate out, in the desert, when they had the building Ra's ship, the interior of that. What is it? Is it not Long Island? What's the place in Los Angeles where?
It was the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary.
Yeah. In the building next to that.
The Hughes thing.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, where the big old plane was, and they built these enormous sets, and you go in there, and it's just, I mean, it is awe-inspiring, and you go in there and you fill it up, and it's like being in a cathedral. Your head just goes to these things. I've got to fill this space with something, which is going to do a service to what everyone else has done, and it did feel it was slightly religious in its reach, I think, but the main thing was, I think, I wanted it to be exciting and fun and principally melodic. It's like I always hark back to the films that I've always loved, where it's like you got a theme and you can sing the theme, and so that was my starting point. Was the Stargate theme was the first thing that I wrote for it, the first thing that I sent to them as well. I wrote that before I went out there. This is like having read the script, and I flew out and I met Dean and Roland, and I came back and I didn't think I was going to get it, because I've only done one movie. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a publisher. I didn't have a record company. I just done one film. And I'd been out to meet them. And I did what I thought you should do in this instance. Was I used to read a magazine called Premiere Magazine. And they used to do sometimes interviews with screenwriters, and they would talk about how they would pitch their latest movie. It's got to be something that people understand like really quickly. Like it's like Die Hard on a plane, or it's like Die Hard in the sea, or it's like Die Hard on something, Jaws in a plane, right? So I thought, like, well, how can I? Maybe that's what I do, because I've never had to pitch for a movie before, because I've done everything with students, where it was just very, you would just chat about it, and everyone was grateful for for doing anything. And I thought, well, maybe I should think of some way of pitching this. So I sort of went in and I said, it's Star Wars meets Lawrence of Arabia, and they said that sounds good. And then I thought, oh, now I've got to do it. That sounds like a good idea, but now you've got to do it. So I came back, and I was just thinking of those two things in a way, as a sort of stylistic, as a kind of tonal idea. And it was just playing with melody, waiting for that melody to happen and to sieve through the trash of your mind to get the moments out and discover them, at the piano, and figure out that the thing that you'd thought of for the last 2 weeks you've been going around in your head actually is terrible. But as a result of that, you're kind of on a different path. And then when it happens, it's, it kind of reveals itself to you in a quite a weird way, but that it's the right thing. You just think this feels like the film, this is it. And for that brief moment, that is the best part of any job. The best part of any job is coming up with what the music is. And the worst part is then having to fit it to 2 hours worth of film. And then the next best part is finishing. So I love the first bit. I love being asked. I love finishing, but the bit in the middle is really hard.
Well, we on that note, we're going to have one more question from the audience from Benjamin Michael Joffe on a wonderful, very unsung film you've done, which is Last of the Dogmen. Can you talk a little bit about your experience working on the film? And it's a movie that, again, continues to age well over time. It just got a release over here on Kino Blu-ray with the original version of the film minus the Wilford Brimley narration.
Yeah. Well, Tab, who directed the movie, one of the producers of Stargate had asked me if I would do it. And I'd never been asked to do anything, I mean, like, well, I tell a lie. I mean, Stargate I'd been asked to do, but I thought, like, there's, this sort of stuff doesn't happen. That while we were mixing Stargate, the producer said, "Can you do my next movie?" So I said, yes. And he sent me the script. Tab Murphy wrote it, who'd written stuff for Disney, and like, brilliant. I saw a couple of stills from it. And it was about one of those things. And I think this is where maybe coming from where I came from helped. Because to a certain extent, Stargate and later, Independence Day is a sort of British person's version of American things, and this was about Last of the Dogman was just sort of about, the great open outdoor American Midwest, going back to, Native Americans and, the whole birth of that country and what happened. But it was about, in a way, the idealization probably of that period of time in America's history, which had always been incredibly romantic in movies. And that was my only experience of it. I hadn't really been anywhere. Films were our way of discovering the rest of the world. And, those John Ford movies, or the big, to a certain extent, I suppose, the Big Country, Magnificent Seven, these things with amazing scores and amazing melodies as well. But, that romantic idea of the West, even though it wasn't necessarily about that period of time, but that's kind of where it was set. And the countryside. And I just felt like, these panning shots, these widescreen shots of this amazing countryside. And then you would see, these Native Americans sort of walk, riding horses into frame through smoke and fog and through the dawn and everything. And it's incredibly beautiful. You just kind of I'm thinking, like, this is all the stuff I remember when I was watching, programs, films about this when I was a kid. And it was kind of recalling that sense of wonder. An inexplicable sense of wonder and warmth. And I thought, this is, a big, long theme, a big, long melody. There's plenty of places to play it. A lot of the time you might write a great tune, but there's nowhere in the film to play it. This one, it takes its time showing you what there is, to look at that's so beautiful. And so, you got these sort of slowish camera movements and, the mountains and the sky and the forests. And it's a gift for a composer to have that, because you're going to hear something. There's no helicopters, there's no tanks, there's no gunshots, there's no cars, there's nothing but the world, the openness of the world, and so everything that you write in music is going to be heard and going to be felt, and that weirdly became quite an easy thing to write. The melody came first, that tune came first. It kind of came under my fingers quite quickly. But again, very unromantically, it was written in a sort of corporate hotel room in Hollywood, next to a shopping mall. And I remember the highlight of my day, because writing can be quite hard and it's sometimes sort of repetitive. The process is like you finish one cue, you start another cue. And I remember just the highlight was going to the mall at 1 o'clock and finding out that they made these things called like chopped salad or something, where someone has pre-chopped and they put it in a bowl. And I thought, this is the greatest thing ever, because like in England, it's like, you know, chopped salad. You wouldn't get a chopped salad. You get like some lettuce leaf and someone would stick a cucumber on it, and a pork pie, and that's a salad, you know. But over there, it's like they had like bowls of this stuff, you know, and you had a bucket full of it, and you could have all your different dressings, and it was like, this is the best thing ever. That's really the main thing I remember about it, other than I loved writing the film, you know. And Tab was brilliant, and I've stayed in touch with him ever since. And I know the film has its fans, and you know, the score. People always say really nice things to me about that. But I think, you know, in the kind of John Barry thing, you know, play the theme, play the theme, play the theme. You know, yeah, it's nice to be able to write stuff like that. And I think if anyone asked me to write a film, I'd always try and find the melodic answer to it first.
Well, to think that Tender Greens could have had a Last of the Dogmen tie-in salad, you know what I mean?
Well, listen, Godzilla had a Godzilla-themed swimming pool you could buy. they would install it, and it was in the shape of a Godzilla footprint. I think there were hundreds of lines of merch with that film. I remember Dean once telling me about, it might have been 700, I don't know, but I remember seeing some of them. One was a Godzilla swimming pool, and the next thing was little foam marshmallow Godzillas that turned up in people's cereals or something like that. You know, it was like really from one extreme to the other. It's just the most amazing bunch of tie-ins. But you know, no such luck. Didn't even get any freebies from them. But I'm not going to go in and say, hey, listen, I'm the guy that did Stargate. Give me a free tomato, you know.
Well, again, I just want to, as we wrap up, I just want to congratulate you on just wonderful, really movingly emotional work for the second season of Good Omens. And you could definitely say, again, it's a cliffhanger ending. Is there more in the works? What's coming up next for you?
What's next for me is there's a couple of interesting things. I did a little animation film a couple of years ago called The Tiger Who Came to Tea, which was there's a British author, children's author called Judith Kerr, and it was its 50th birthday. And it's one of those books that is forever in bookshops and forever in people's children's book collections. It's got its own shelf in a bookshop, all the different versions of it. It's a short story, mainly illustrations, and it's about a tiger who turns up a little girl's house one day and eats everything in the house and goes, and that's basically it. That's all that happens. But it's brilliant. Anyway, so we did an animated version of that, which went out Christmas Eve, I think. It was, I think, the third highest rated show that was on that channel that year. Anyway, so they've now moved on to another of her books, which is about a cat called Mog, and it's about that cat's Christmas. I think there are quite a few Mog books. And it did an extraordinary thing with children's literature, is that at the end of the run of Mog books, she wrote a book about Mog dying, you know, and it's so incredibly beautiful the way it was done. And I won't tell you what it is, but the last page of that book will bring tears to your eyes. It's the most extraordinary, wonderful, beautiful thing. And it's about the loss of the cat who'd done all these things in these other books, and it ends up dying. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to do with kids' books. But anyway, this is a joyful one about Christmas. So I think I start scoring that sort of September for sort of recording, finish it in the middle of October. And there's a song in the middle of that, which I really like, and I've written with Don Black as well, did the lyric. And it's a song about, you know, it's nice to belong, you know, it's about as long as, and so there's that. And then I'm doing some gigs, which I've never done before, without an orchestra. Because every time I do, you know, you can do gigs with orchestras. I had a bit of an epiphanal moment. I was doing a concert with an orchestra, and I was sitting down, I was playing, and I thought, if I dropped down dead right now, this concert would still go on, and it wouldn't be that different. You know, I mean, apart from me being dead at the front of it, it wouldn't be that different. You could still play it, you know. And I realized that, you know, I do like doing those things, but there's something a little bit disconnecting about introducing or playing along with like orchestral stuff. I mean, it is beautiful and it's an amazing experience, but I kind of like all these songs and things that I've done over the years. you couldn't really do them with an orchestra without it sounding quite polite, you know. And some of those songs are meant to be quite aggressive, you know, and uglier. And I thought, I've never done it before. I'm going to go out and I'm going to have like a 6-7 piece band, you know, like sort of guitar, bass, drums, per couple of keyboards. And I'm just going to do songs from films and TV and records that I've made with people and songs that I've written with people, and some haven't been heard before. I'm going to do like some small gigs around the UK, and just see how it is. You know, the principal thing is, am I going to like it? And the next thing is anyone else going to like it? If everyone else likes it and I don't, then I won't do any more. If I like it and no one else does, I won't do any more. If I like it and they like it, then I'll do some more. But that's kind of like November. There's a little week of doing about 6 or 7 gigs around the country in smallish places, you know, like a couple of 100 people. So it's going to be the whites of their eyes, no escape, you know. And if I drop down dead in those gigs, then the gig would have to stop.
Well, that's the plot
So
of
that's
Good
my
Omens
principal
3.
thing. Like, yeah, I'm only going to do things now that if I drop down dead, it makes a difference.
Well, David, I just want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. I want you to watch both seasons of Good Omens on Amazon Prime right now, with David's score for season 1 and season 2 available on Silver Screen Music. And I want to thank La La Land Records for their giveaways of the new special edition soundtrack of David Arnold's score for Hot Fuzz. A special thanks to our producers Mark Northam and Dale Turner, our designer Mark Banning, and David Stoner at Silver Screen Records. And I'll be seeing you on the next Film Music Live Monday, August 14th at 12:30, as we are joined by the composers and the showrunner of Max's Warrior. Thank you for joining, everyone, and thank you so much, David.
You're very welcome. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, my friend.